Cameron. Good morning, Revolution, and welcome to our show this morning. We got Aaron in DC. Hey, Aaron, good morning. And we got Anita in Ohio and Taryn with us here in New York. You won't believe who we just endorsed for a leading position in this country. And you're not going to find out until the end of the show. So wait, and in anticipation of what the Communist Party, who we support in this coming election. But first, let's start Taryn. We are of the opinion, I want to state this from the outset so that nobody is confused. We believe that there is a credible threat of fascism in this country coming from MAGA and that section of the ruling class and Trump as their spokesperson and Bannon and all the rest of them fools. And we support a popular front, or you can call it an anti-MAGA coalition, in order to defeat that threat. And there are those who say that there's a danger of being co-opted in that front, you know? And they're not totally wrong in that position. But we've argued that these kinds of coalitions are okay so long as, to quote Lenin, we put a working class stamp on that fight, on that coalition, working class imprint. So my question to you is, in what ways has the working class placed its stamp on this election? Um, or has it? What's your opinion?
Well, I think that the working class operates through organized labor when it comes to elections, the majority of the time. I mean, especially here in a place like New York City, nobody can get elected unless you have union members who are willing to come out and knock on doors with you. I think that the really big significant difference for this election, however, is that labor has been very, very loud about their contribution. Labor helps to finance these electoral machines. They are literally the human beings who are knocking on doors and making calls for candidates. And I feel like that has brought the working class stamp onto this very temporary kind of coalition, that even if Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are trying to go around and go tour with, Lynn Cheney or whoever, that the unions are still there. They're still being loud. They're not being kicked off of the stage. You could see it out in Philadelphia recently, where you had union leaders on stage with other progressive candidates. They're sort of coalescing a large contingent of the Democratic Party in order to bring that stamp that you're referring to this election. And so I feel like that is a major way that that the working class has made a stamp on this election. And then at the same time, I also feel like issues like abortion and being against racism are very much intrinsically, working class issues. And I think that you can see sort of in how it is that people are reacting to a lot of the hateful Trump rhetoric out there, that you do have working people who are coming forward and saying, this affects me deeply. So I guess, I mean, the working class puts its stamp on almost anything it wants to. But I feel like this election cycle, we've been much more loud about our contribution. And I feel like the louder we get, the harder we are to ignore within that kind of temporary coalition against the MAGA right.
It's really important because when you build a coalition, you got different constituencies and different sections of the coalition, and everybody wants their point of view represented. And so you've seen some shifts in the candidates' positions, for example, on immigration, which ain't so great, and on issues like fracking and so on and so forth, and so there's that kind of accommodation. But on the PRO Act, on abortion rights, on voting rights, and so on, which are also working class issues, that those positions have been maintained. Anita, these pressures when you're working in coalitions um, give rise to what I like to call pitfalls in the left. I like to call it pitfalls of socialist consciousness. Or to put it differently, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, is, opportunism. You're trying to get people to like you and you're appealing to different sections of the population. So sometimes there are movements to the left, sometimes to the right. I'm thinking that after the election, we should have a conversation on the pitfalls of the Popular Front policy because there are some, no? Do you think that would be a useful conversation, number one? And if so, what are some of the pitfalls that have appeared historically in our application of this policy?
Thank you, Joe. That's a really important question, I think. And I think we have seen some pitfalls of socialist consciousness in this election cycle. And I think we always have to constantly review our struggles against left opportunism and right opportunism. We should constantly and deliberately and intentionally keep that struggle in front of our minds. And I think one of the pitfalls of the right opportunism comes from the election. I think people get caught up in the election process. And this question reminded me of a People's Weekly World headline, "Victory," it says. And I came across this paper and I thought, what victory did we win in the 90s? Well, it was the 1998 election. And I think people, we did defeat a lot of Newt Gingrich's candidates and we brought in, Democratic stalwarts in elections that had been represented by Republicans, like Chuck Schumer in New York and even John Edwards in North Carolina, Barbara Boxer. So it seemed like a victory, but I think we had to really step back and say, was this a victory for the working class or was this just something we were working for? And we were, I think nobody would look back on that election and see it as a victory for the working class. So I think we do have that danger in this election too, of having been, caught up in the electoral process, and even our Democratic candidates. For instance, in a red state like Ohio, we see the Democratic candidates kind of moving to the right and really courting Trump voters, which they would have to do in Ohio to win, for example. So that will shift into a different a problem of left opportunism, of seeing the Democratic Party is just, caught up in the same ruling class politics as the Republicans. So I think we do have to have that conversation. We do have to have it in an international context too, because Steve Bannon, who just got released from prison, he is all about internationally organizing the far right. So I think we have to struggle against both those tendencies. The tendency we'll see how many people. I hope a lot of the Jill Stein supporters will realize at the end the futility of that argument and vote against fascism. We'll see. So it's an important conversation. I look forward to it.
Who was running in 1998? That's too far back for this little brain.
It was the midterms. It was the midterms in Clinton's second term. So it seems like it wasn't such an important election. It didn't seem so. And our victories of 1998, such as they were, really just turned into our defeat in 2000, thanks to the Supreme Court giving the election to George Bush.
And when was it that Gingrich and that whole big group of right-wing Republicans that kind of set the stage for MAGA, was that 98?
They were defeated in 98 to a certain extent.
They were defeated, yes. So that was the victory.
So that was the victory. That's the victory they're talking about.
Well, that was an important victory because those jokers were serious. That's when you had they called it the contract with America. Remember that? We called it the contract on America. And you had 3 strikes, you're out. You had
Mm-hmm.
children being tried as adults, for capital and other
Yep.
crimes.
Mass
You had
incarceration.
the prison, the school to prison pipeline, and so on and
Mm-hmm.
so forth. Aaron, that was a hell of a that was a
Mm-hmm.
that was a dangerous, very welfare deform. They used to call it aid to for to dependent children was gotten rid of welfare and so on. It was a tough. That was a tough period, Aaron. But another pitfall before I go to Aaron. You know, during the uh, Second World War, Anita Browder, General Secretary of the party, Roosevelt, very popular president,
Mm-hmm.
and they Browder drew the conclusion during that popular front period that the class struggle had kind of gotten de-emphasized and that there was this new period of cooperation between the Soviet Union and the United States, between East and West. Therefore, you didn't need a communist party. You could
Mm.
all function in the Democratic Party. And the party was dissolved, called it the
Mm-hmm.
Communist Political Association. And we saw that repeated in this country during the
Mm-hmm.
Obama period, where people, we don't really need a communist party, we're just a movement. And there were pressures on us to dissolve. So that's another
Right.
pitfall. Aaron,
Mm-hmm.
Marxism calls for consistent working class positions, right?
Yep.
On every question, consistent democracy, on women's equality, on racial equality, LGBTQ equality. And when you don't do that, what happens? Uh, it, you run into pitfalls or fall into pitfalls of disunity. People feel like their needs aren't being addressed, and they're not. And they're like, why should I support you? You ain't supporting me. We ran into that ourselves in our own work recently when we left the youth and student movement off of our electoral platform, you know?
Mm.
Self-critically, we did that and it was pointed out to us and we made a correction. Um, can you share with us what did we leave out and how did the YCL help us correct it? What are the issues that are important in our electoral platform for youth and students?
Absolutely, Joe. When we fail to address critical issues that represent different constituencies, we are creating disunity. And like you exactly said, that leaves very important segments of our coalition feeling like they're being overlooked. And the issues that we failed to bring up that affect the youth and student movement were student debt and affirmative action. By not taking a clear stance on canceling student debt, we neglected a significant barrier for many working class youth. Our party believes that education is a right? It's not a privilege. And so that is exactly why it is so important for us to take a stance against this crisis. Right now, the student debt, it's reached a staggering like 1.7 trillion, and it's not just a temporary hurdle for young people. It is something that limits our opportunities. It stifles our aspirations. And so canceling student debt would be transformative. It would allow young people to pursue their dreams, start families without the burden of financial stress. Additionally, we also can't afford to overlook, right, the recent dismantling of affirmative action by the conservative majority Supreme Court. this decision represented a serious setback for the democratic rights of young people of color in particular. And so that is exactly why also we have to call for restoring affirmative action so that we can like level the playing field and ensure that historically oppressed communities have genuine opportunities to succeed for the first time. And so together, canceling student debt, restoring affirmative action, these are all essential steps that we as a party have to advocate for so that we can build unity with the youth and student movement and let them know that their unique struggles, their specific and critical issues aren't being overlooked by our party and they're not unrepresented in the coalition that we're trying to build.
Very, very important. And so we can never afford to neglect it. But we make mistakes like everybody else. And when we make them, we correct them. And that is a symbol, is an indication of an honest party. Not that you don't
Mhm.
make mistakes, but when you make them, you say, hey, y'all, I made a mistake, and here is the correction. Taryn, staying on this theme of pitfalls for another moment, um, another problem that has developed over the last period is the impact of what we call American exceptionalism on the left. That is to say, and this is particularly with respect to the election, folks are saying it can't happen here. It's not going to happen here, you know? And there are left and right variations of this impact of American exceptionalist ideas. The right version of it says that the U.S. institutions are strong, very strong. We the center held during the past Trump administration, and the courts held, Congress held. We pushed Trump back, and the left says that, look, y'all, there's no real threat to capitalism here. The working class movement, the left is weak, and then they go on to say, and that's one side of it. And some of them then also say, we're already living under fascism. What are you talking about? Um, Trump won't use open terror. Have you heard that? What do they think, Taryn, is going to happen when Trump uses the army to round up, as they have promised, millions of immigrants? Won't that be a form of open terror? And what's going to happen when the militias get involved in the process? Have they forgotten what happened during Reconstruction when the Ku Klux Klan arose and the White Citizens Council who rained open terror on African American families in the South?
Yeah, obviously. I mean, it's extremely disappointing to hear people try and play down the very real and very serious danger that our class faces under another Trump presidency. I mean, you don't even have to go back as far as Reconstruction. We can go back to Charlottesville if you want to talk about, fascist mobs that are trying to, push their will on the working class. I mean, that was open terror. I guess maybe Donald Trump wasn't there, but his fans were there. His fans launched projectiles, shot guns at us, beat people in parking garages and drove their cars through people. I mean, that's a pretty clear indication that this is how, the Trump movement intends on enforcing its fascist ideology. You can already see it taking place right now in the run up to the election. You can see across the country in Texas and South Carolina, in my very hometown, you've got people showing up with machetes threatening voters. You've got people, beating up poll workers. You've got folks who are firebombing, vote drop boxes. Like, if this doesn't say to you that these people are very serious about being violent, if you don't add into that Charlottesville, January 6th, and going all the way back to the Klan terror, to the racist pushback against the civil rights movement, then I don't really understand what planet you're living on at this point. And there are people who should know better. right? There are people who should know better, people who have had to deal with that fascist terror, who have organized around it or whatever, who are now just sort of, I guess, jumping on this social media bandwagon of saying, what could be so bad about another Trump administration? There are even people who are cynically saying that with another Trump administration, that will revitalize the anti-war movement, that will revitalize the pushback against capitalism in this country. And these people are talking about our working class as if they're cannon fodder. And it's disgusting to me personally. I'm sorry, I don't mean to get so worked up about it. But, it's like these are not the people who are going to be out there putting their lives on the line. These are not the people who are going to be dying of sepsis in emergency rooms from not being able to get abortions. These are not people who are living with racist terror just around the corner. These are people who are playing games for clout, right? It's opportunistic. I mean, I think that when Donald Trump is on television, as of yesterday, saying that Lynn Cheney should be, facing a firing squad, when he's saying all of this stuff about going after his enemies with the military, when the military itself has to be appealed to as saying, you're supposed to be respecting the Constitution and not the president, when, grunts have to get lectures on how they're supposed to uphold the Constitution and not go after like this MAGA right movement. I just think it's beyond. I mean, maybe that is the American exceptionalism, right? Is when people don't think that it could happen here. Is they say, it couldn't be like it was in Germany. It couldn't be like it was in Chile. It couldn't be like it was in Spain. I mean, this is the beating heart of global capitalism is in the United States. It is the greatest. Sorry, there's a fire alarm going off. But it's this is where the Pentagon is. And so if people don't think that it's very easy for the MAGA right to turn those guns around on us, then they're absolutely out of control. We need to keep up this anti-fascist struggle. And that includes voting against fascism. I'm sorry to say it takes you 20 minutes out of your day, if you're lucky. Obviously, people are standing in line for a long time, but it takes you no time at all. You know what they say, like, what is it? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Like, there are plenty of people out there. You can't ask people to put their lives on the line. And after you have just so flippantly said that there is not a real danger coming at us, this is completely bonkers stuff. And it makes me obviously very worked up. So.
Well, you're right to be worked up. And Aaron, I was worked up. Did you check out that rally at Madison Square Garden? I mean, you talk about raw racism, raw misogyny, raw anti-Semitism. Puerto Ricans are garbage. Associating black folk with watermelon. The attack on immigrants. I think I saw one of those shows where they took a quote from a Nazi in the 1939 rally at Madison Square Garden, who was complaining about assistance that were given to Jews fleeing Hitler's Germany. And they compared that to a statement made at the rally the other day, on Sunday, about immigrants from Mexico and Central America, saying we're putting them up in hotels, 5-star hotels, while good Americans are suffering. Can you imagine? Some things never change, do they, Aaron? They just go back and repeat this stuff from 50, 100 years ago and act like it's new.
Absolutely, Joe. Like you exactly said, the disturbing scenes that we saw at Madison Square Garden last Sunday, they were overt displays of racism, overt displays of misogyny. And again, exactly like you said, we're not surprised. As you noted, a lot of people have started drawing parallels to the Nazi rally that was held at the exact same venue in 1939. And for good reason. The rhetoric that we saw was raw and it was unapologetic. They whipped out derogatory racial stereotypes, calling Puerto Rico garbage, insulting Vice President Harris as a low IQ candidate, right? Echoing that kind of eugenics type argument, portraying immigrants as like parasites on resources meant for real Americans. And unfortunately, like all of this language is too familiar to people of color, right, who have faced such insults since childhood, and it frighteningly mirrors the exact same dehumanizing rhetoric that was used against Jewish people in the 1930s. So I think you're right. Some things never change, honestly. And you know, if we look in the history of this country, we know that the slogan "America First" is a really good example of this. Although, the far right has tried to rebrand it over years, its roots have always kind of been in this racist white supremacy that goes way, way back to the early 20th century. You had figures like Charles Lindbergh using anti Semitic sentiments and sympathy for Nazi ideals, and this was revived by Donald Trump and his fascist MAGA movement. So this isn't a new phenomenon. This is the resurfacing of a old and deeply reactionary movement and deeply reactionary slogan. And when Trump and MAGA echo this kind of slogan, I think it is really important for us to emphasize that this isn't a new phenomenon, although it is exceptionally dangerous, right? Because they are telling us who they are. They're showing their true identities. And kind of like Taryn said, right? You have some people on the left that say it can't happen here. But when we have these far right forces using these dehumanizing rhetoric and whipping out these like racist stereotypes, they are telling us exactly who they are. And for those of us who know about the history of fascist movements in this country, we know that this is a continuation of the same dangerous fascist sentiments that have historically threatened democracy and fueled hate against people of color and other oppressed nationalities. So, in response to all of this, I really think that we have to rally behind the words of Lenin, right? Through liberty to socialism. We know that bigotry is the weapon, the ruling class's favorite weapon against our working class. And so that's exactly why we say that we can't afford to sit on the sidelines in the fight against fascism, in the fight against racist white Christian nationalism. We, as communists, we have an obligation to roll up our sleeves and throw ourselves in the work to defeat the fascist danger. And that's exactly how we are going to, win majority of the people in this country for socialism.
That's how we're going to win it.
Mhm.
Anita, Aaron makes the point that about this bigotry and its history and how it, in some ways, there's nothing new. They just repeat
Mhm.
the big lie over and over and over again. The more you repeat it, the more people believe it. And we know that racism is more than name calling. It's more than the ideas in a bigot's head that are repeated incessantly. Uh, but it is a system of practices and institutions, which is why we talk about institutionalized racism in this country, which is also embedded in the economy. I like to say that racism is in the DNA of U.S. monopoly capitalism. One of those practices is voter suppression. And we see in Texas, they're purging the voting rolls. Indiana, purging the voting rolls. It happens
Mhm.
every election. They try to suppress the black vote, the Latino vote, the youth vote. You know,
Sure.
they consistently attempt to suppress it. Now the party's electoral platform correctly has a plank dealing with electoral form and how to address voter suppression. Can you explicate some of those ideas and what are we going to do in order to break out of this voter suppression, but also this two-party trap, and I think it is a two-party
Mhm.
trap that we live under.
Sure, Joe. It's really, this year has been, I guess some of the things never changed, as Aaron said, that the voter suppression goes on every time. But this year, it seems like it's especially well organized. These big companies or big organizations, well funded organizations that go after voters that challenging their eligibility in Texas and Arizona, and I know in Virginia. In Ohio, they are really trying to intimidate voters by arresting and charging with crime of 6 individuals who voted illegally in the last election. So I think, our electoral platform has a really good attention to the right to vote. We endorse the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would protect voters and make sure every vote counts. We support the idea of ranked choice voting, which opens up the possibilities for more of people's will to be had in the voting booth. We also want to work towards overturning Citizens United decision that puts all this money in politics and really distorts the will of the people. So I think we want to see more. Another thing is political scientists. I have to put in a little dig to political scientists who tell people their votes don't matter because it's just an individual vote. But they don't see it as a collective part of a collective action, a strategic vote with your fellow human beings who care about democracy. That's what we're really and that's what we're doing when we vote. We're voting with people in coalition with our neighbors, our coworkers, and our families. So I think we really have to fight against all of this. Gerrymandering as well. We're having a big fight against gerrymandering in Ohio this time around. And gerrymandering really makes voting kind of boring. What's the point of voting? 96% of the people in my district are going to vote for this one candidate anyway, so I might as well sit this one out. Having elections being much more competitive would increase election interest on the part of people. So I think our party has a lot of different views. We really want to take a national, work toward a national voting system where you get a voting ID maybe or a voter number, voter registration, and you can take that if you move, if you go to college, if you move from place to place as demanded by capitalism nowadays. You'll be able to take that with you and vote. So there's a lot of work to do in this field.
Voter ID at birth,
Mm-hmm.
like your social security number. You take it and you carry it with you everywhere you go. So long as they don't put it as a hashtag on your forehead, that would not be a good idea. You're right about this gerrymandering. I remember back in Ohio, they took Dennis Kucinich, I think it was Kucinich's district that was in Cleveland, and they created this like 200-mile long district that went from Cleveland 200 miles across the state. It was like 200 miles long and 2 miles wide.
The snake on the lake is what they call it.
We need radical reform of the election system. And it's on the agenda, y'all. So, the Electoral College, we need to get rid of it. Popular vote. We need different forms of elections themselves. You spoke about some of them. But we have to deal with the here and now, Taryn. And in this election, and in every election since the Dobbs decision, women have been decisive in coming out and defeating MAGA candidates up and down the ballot in Kansas, in Wisconsin, in Ohio, and not by small margins, 10, 11, 12 points. You've been canvassing. What has been your experience? And do you think that in this election, women are going to save the country from the MAGA right, along with their male allies? But are women going to be decisive?
Well, I think it was pretty stupid for the MAGA right to go to war with exactly half of this country's population, half of the working class, if not a little bit more. But that's what's happened now. You can see it through the MAGA right's discussion of not just, banning abortions, but banning birth control. Also, even, there's been discussion about ending no-fault divorce. I think, and honestly, I mean, it's bonkers to even think about. But there have even been people, these pundits who get millions of views on YouTube, who are talking about overturning the 19th Amendment, trying to take away women's rights to vote more generally. And you can really see this in how the polls are starting to manifest. That there is a massive upswell of women who are saying to themselves, yeah, I don't really want to live in a world where I have to be some man in my life's property. I don't want to have a family where I am just by default an unequal partner. I don't want to have a boss or a friend or, a child or anything like that that's going to view me as being less than because I am a woman. And I think, this dovetails with the LGBTQ community and the trans community, in that, like, yeah, we have an inherent worth. We are part of the working class. And if you really want to go to war with more than half of the working class, you're going to have to try and win in a very undemocratic way, which is what we have seen the MAGA right be doing this entire time. When I've been out canvassing, I haven't had a whole lot of discussions about abortion. It's almost like a given. I will say that I actually have not talked to one woman who has been saying that they're going to go vote for Trump. I have talked to women who weren't sure if they were going to go out and vote, but once we had a little bit of a conversation about what was on the ballot, in New York, for instance, we have Proposition 1, which everybody should be voting yes on. That's the abortion proposition for the ballot, that then people are more energized to go out and vote. I've had conversations with people about the sorts of racist remarks that have been made around the Haitian community. That has motivated women to go and vote, so yeah, I mean, women wake up every day and they try and fix a lot of the problems that men have foisted upon the world. And I don't think that this election is going to be an exception. You can already see it because the extreme right is freaking out about how there are more women than men who are voting in swing states like Pennsylvania, right? Oh, men need to get out there and vote and vote and vote, or else we're going to lose this thing. There's discussion about how, if a woman lies to her husband about who it is that she's voting for, that's just as bad as having an affair. That this is a fundamentally dishonest thing. And that's because, the campaign has been running ads about how you don't have to tell anybody who you vote for in your family. And I've seen it at some households where it's like the husband will answer how it is that his wife is going to vote. And it's like, you don't know that, but there is this assumption, especially on the extreme right, that, your wife is your property, your children are your property, that's your personal fiefdom that you can exercise this sort of fascistic control over. And I think that since a majority of people in the country do not fall under that kind of patriarchal advantage, that they're pushing against it. And I also don't think, and I want to mention, because this is very important, when people are trying to talk about how, well, Trump is making gains with non-white men, that is also not borne out by the statistics, that you can still see overwhelming support for anything against Donald Trump from these communities of color, because there is, of course, the understanding that most of the women who have died in hospitals or in emergency rooms or at home from not receiving proper abortion care are Black women, right? There is that understanding. And then also because they understand that the MAGA right is broader than just attacking women. It's this fascistic, anti-democratic push towards white men being able to undemocratically control the rest of the country. So yeah, I really hope that it bears out. I really hope that there is a wave of people who come out and vote and say, we're not going to go back to, Jim Crow. We're not going to go back to clothes hangers. And people could say, oh, well, but, this has all happened under a Biden administration. There's the courts, they've been helpless to do anything about the courts. And it's like, yeah, because you need that massive Democratic upswell that sets the stage for saying this is unacceptable. I'm angry in New York State because for Proposition 1, I am the one who has had to tell people that this is the abortion proposition, right? Because even the Democrats in this state are so cowardly, so craven, so beholden to their corporate interests, that they won't even use the word abortion, when that word is actually very powerful for a majority of people in this country and something that I believe we need to rally more around. And it's only by us in a mass way pushing that that's going to happen. There are two more justices who are planning to retire during the next presidency. And they can either be MAGA right justices, or they can be justices who might say, okay, we're not going to deal with the MAGA right stuff anymore. Also, we're pro reforming the court, putting, ethics standards in place. Maybe they're pro packing the court. I don't know. But we need to push. We don't have a crystal ball, but we can try and put ourselves on a trajectory for success as opposed to a trajectory for ruin. Nothing's perfect, but at least we can take a step in the right direction, or we can take a step in the wrong direction.
And Aaron, thank you, Taryn. Taryn kind of touched on my next question to you. What about the gender issue as it applies to cis men, and in particular Black men? They're saying that Black men may cost Harris and her running mate the election. Are we the problem?
No, yeah, that's a good question, Joe. I think that we do, right, hear this claim a lot of the time, especially when we are discussing like gender issues, right? It's really simple and honestly a little reductive to, blame Black men for electoral losses, I think. Say what you will about Kamala Harris, but she has taken a step in the right direction, I think, by proposing policies specifically aimed at Black men. I think that kind of shows that she understands that she has to earn people's votes. And again, blaming Black men, I think, is a oversimplification and a form of scapegoating, honestly. And I think it really stems from a misguided framing of the discussion. Across all racial groups, there are people who feel unheard and feel undervalued and think that their votes don't count. And, it's our responsibility to really engage with those people and, try to convince them, hey, don't be a political spectator. Be a political actor. You have a stake in what's happening right now. And, I really think that a lot of Black men are, in fact, the least supportive of Trump when compared to other male voters. So I find it very, very interesting that the media is pushing this narrative that exceptionalizes Black men and tries to frame us as if we are the problem. And I think something that we really need to do a better job of in trying to like reach these constituencies and really try to build that broad and united popular front that we talk so much about is understanding that we can't just use like a fear of MAGA to compel people into voting. We also have to communicate to people what they can gain under a Democratic administration versus a Republican administration. And I think that is part of how we tell people, oh, hey, you might not necessarily be the most excited about this candidate, but showing people what their interests are and showing them what is the path forward, right? What is the form of struggle that it's going to take to actually win on people's issues. That's what organizing is all about. And that's what building a coalition is about also. So I think in order to, continue like pushing back against this narrative, we really have to, I think, stay focused and be specific and really do a better job of tailoring our messaging and our policy proposals, honestly, for into our coalition if we really want to build something that is inclusive and is actually capable.
And that means when you speak about tailoring our messaging, we have to be a bigger part of the electoral process, running our own candidates, putting our own ideas out there. That is extremely important too. And a positive vision. As you like to say, Aaron, we got to block, but we also got to build. And we got to build, as some of our friends on the left are saying, with a positive message, a message that puts forward ideas that provide real solutions to a working class people's problems. Because this divide and conquer nonsense, which is what the attack on black men is all about, its purpose is to divide our community and divide our community from the rest of the population. Let's be clear about that. And we're not going to have it. And we're not going to agree to it. And and that's that. And just wait and see what the polls, exit polls, and the actual data reveals after the election. You know, black folk didn't get this far in life being stupid. Um, we're coming to the end of our program. Anita, um,
Yes.
first question: who's going to win this election, in your opinion?
I think Harris and Walz will win, and I think we'll even hold on to the Senate. I think Sherrod Brown will win in Ohio, and Dan Osborne in Nebraska might take a seat back from the. So I have hope. I have hope that you're right. The working class didn't get this far being stupid either. I think we will come to our senses and vote Harris Walz.
Now, we're not talking about yet who we're going to endorse. We're coming to that in
No,
just a
no,
second.
I
We're
know. I
not
realize
endorsing
that. I'm just
anybody.
saying,
But you're
it's just a
predicting that
prediction.
it's going to
Yeah.
be Harris and that's a bold ass prediction. Harris and Walt and the Senate and the
Hmm.
House. So it's going to be a sweep.
Hopefully.
Taryn, what do you think?
I mean, I feel really burned about making any kind of election prediction. So I can predict. I mean, people have been asking me, what do you think the outcome is going to be? And I can say that it's going to be really important for us to defend the vote. That either which way, whether or not Harris wins or whether or not, Trump wins, uh, no matter what, it's going to be trouble. And so I think that people need to stay really alert and they need to be ready to go into the streets, to knock on doors, to go to court in order to protect the vote. Because I don't think that these fascists are interested necessarily in winning elections at this point, to be totally frank with you. It's my hope that it's a blowout for Harris and Walz, because I think anything less than a blowout, when people say, oh, I live in a safe state, I don't, it's not necessary, I can vote third party or whatever. If it's not a Democratic blowout, then you're going to see the type of violence that we saw all during the Trump administration. And then afterwards, on January 6th, you're going to see people with machetes outside of polling places. You cannot underestimate the fascist danger, even if we were to have, a landslide. I think part of the reason why they're doing these polls right now that say, oh, the election is running so close, is because a lot of people on the extreme right are looking at that. And so if there is a blowout, for Harris and Walz on election day, all of these right wingers have been ginned up with this violence and with this idea in their head that, like, oh, of course Trump is going to win, that they're not going to believe the results, right? So I think that it's very important for us. That's my prediction, is that there's going to be trouble. And so I think it's important for us, yes, of course we're going to stay up late and we're going to watch the results. And, maybe we're going to sleep in a little bit the next day. But after that, it's got to be go time. We need to be ready to do what it takes to defend the vote.
So you're not sure, and you're focusing on defending the vote.
I'm
You're
not
kind of
sure of
hedging it.
anything
That's
except for
okay.
trouble.
That's okay. That's okay. Aaron, your prediction.
Yeah, Joe. I think honestly, similar to Taryn, I'm also a little hesitant when it comes to making predictions. But I think nonetheless, hope is really something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. And I do kind of feel like hopeful that, we can have a victory for our people and for our future in November. And so I think with that in mind, I'm leaning towards a Kamala Harris and Tim Walz victory, but at the same time, I think we do have to recognize that we are dealing with a really, really aggressive and sophisticated disinformation operation that is coming from these right wing billionaires. And so I feel like that is kind of making it a little difficult for us to parse through the media narratives and actually figure out like what is going to happen. But nonetheless, I do think that the potential to beat MAGA and to deny them both houses of Congress, it does exist. And we know that because the majority of people in this country are opposed to their far right agenda. And so I think, similar to Taryn, this election is really going to kind of come down to the amount of work that we're willing to put in, especially in these last few days, because it's crunch time. And then again, kind of like Taryn said, immediately after, Harris Wall's victory, we're going to have to immediately pivot, I think, to trying to defend the results of the election. There's going to be a lot of things that happen between Election Day and Inauguration Day. And while Trump doesn't really control the machinery of government in the same way that he did in 2020, these people are not going to give up power without a fight. So I think we have to be ready for that fight.
Got to be ready for the fight. You got to be ready to rock and roll. And even if it's a blowout, they're going to try to take it. So, define a blowout. The 2020 won by 8-9 million votes. And you saw what happened on January the 20th. But you're right, the popular vote is important. Don't minimize it. And now for the drum roll. Who are we going to endorse? And I say, and I think the Communist Party says, and we have been saying, we endorse the struggle. We endorse the people who are fighting back. We endorse the women who have moved every election since Dom in the direction of democracy. Again, by 10, 11 vote, we endorse the African American women, the Latino women, the Asian women, white women who are coming up and understanding what is at stake in this election and making marking the X in the right spot. We endorse the men and people of other genders who understand what's at stake in the fight for democracy and who have been personing the phones and writing the postcards and knocking on doors in this election. We endorse the trade unions and the the civil rights organizations who have been fighting this fight, not just in the last 3 months, but ever since Trump came down that golden escalator attacking immigrants with his racist garbage. That's the racist garbage that we are fighting. Join us next week on Good Morning Revolution. We'll be back to analyze what happened. I think that past is going to be prelude to what's going to happen on Tuesday. I see victory in the air for the executive. I'm not sure about the Senate, either. We'll see. We'll see. I hope you're right. But whatever the outcome, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, the working class and people of this country are going to have to fight. We're going to have to fight around the issues around Gaza, around abortion rights, around the border and this vicious attack on immigrants, on the environment. 82 degrees in New York yesterday, y'all. At the end of October, 82. I couldn't believe it. Stay strong, stay safe, stay in the fight. We'll see everybody next week. Take care and thanks to the panelists. Bye now.
Bye, everybody.